Welcome back to Stories from the Ancient World. Tonight, we descend into shadow and silence, into the place where all things end and begin again. We travel to the realm beneath the earth, where pomegranate seeds seal a bargain that will change the seasons forever. This is the story of Hades and Persephone and the marriage that bound the living world to the land of the dead. But before we begin, I want you to ask yourself a question. What would you give up to end loneliness? What price would you pay for love if that love meant leaving behind everything you knew, everyone you held dear, and descending into eternal darkness? Hold that question as we journey back through time, back to when gods walked the earth and their desires shaped the very fabric of existence. Let us go to ancient Greece, to a time before cities rose and fell, before empires carved their names into history. The world then was young, wild, governed by forces we have forgotten. Mount Olympus stood wreathed in clouds, home to Zeus and his divine court. But our story does not begin in that shining palace above. It begins in the fields of Sicily, where the earth was rich and dark, where wildflowers grew in such abundance that the very air shimmered with color. The sun warmed the grass there. You could smell the narcissus and the violet, the rose and the crocus. Bees moved lazily from bloom to bloom, their humming a constant song beneath the whisper of the wind. The soil was so fertile that farmers would simply scatter seed and watch it grow, as if the earth itself were eager to give life. Springs bubbled up clear and cold from the rock. Olive trees twisted their ancient arms toward the sky. This was a place of pure abundance, of life celebrated in every green shoot, every opening petal. And there was a reason for this abundance. A goddess walked those fields. Her name was Persephone, though some knew her as Kore the maiden. She was the daughter of Demeter, goddess of the harvest, of grain, of all growing things. Persephone had known nothing but sunlight and her mother's love. She spent her days among the flowers, gathering them into crowns, weaving them into garlands. The nymphs were her companions. They would dance through the meadows, laughing, their bare feet pressing patterns into the soft grass. Persephone's voice rose in song, clear and bright as the morning star. She knew every flower by name. She knew where the sweetest blossoms grew, which valleys held the first blooms of spring, where the lilies opened their white faces to the sun. Her fingers were always stained with pollen. Her hair always carried the scent of jasmine and wild thyme. She was innocence itself, joy without shadow, a creature of light who had never known sorrow. But if Persephone belonged to the world of sun and flower, there was another god who dwelt in a very different realm, deep beneath the surface of the earth. Beyond the reach of sun or star, beyond the knowledge of mortal men, lay the underworld. The Greeks called it Erebos, the place of shadow. Some called it the house of Hades, named for its lord and master. It was not a place of fire and torment, not yet. In those ancient days it was simply the land of the dead, a dim and echoing realm where the shades of mortals wandered, pale and insubstantial, remembering the lives they had left behind. Hades ruled there alone. He was the eldest of the great sons of Kronos, older even than Zeus, though Zeus had led the war against the Titans and claimed the sky as his domain. Poseidon had taken the seas, and Hades, drawing the shortest lot, had descended into darkness to rule the dead. It was a kingdom no one envied. No prayers rose to him from the world above. No temples crowned the hilltops in his honor. The living feared to speak his name as if the very sound might draw his attention, might mark them for an early grave. So Hades sat upon his throne of black stone in his palace of shadow, and he was utterly, completely alone. The dead were poor company. They drifted past him like smoke, barely aware, caught in dreams of the lives they had lost. His palace was vast and empty. His wealth was beyond measure, for all the gold and silver and precious stones lay in his domain, buried deep in the earth. But what use was wealth when there was no one to share it with? What use was power when there was no warmth, no laughter, no light? He grew cold in that darkness. Not cold in body, for gods do not suffer as mortals do, but cold in spirit. He began to forget what it was to feel joy, to hope, to want anything beyond the steady governance of his cheerless realm. Until one day he rose from his throne and drove his chariot up through the hidden ways, up through the caverns and the deep places, up toward the light. Perhaps he only meant to see the sun again. Perhaps he only wanted to remember what the living world looked like, to feel warmth on his face, to breathe air that did not taste of stone and silence. His black horses pulled his chariot through a fissure in the earth, and he emerged into the fields of Sicily, into that place of abundance and life. And there, among the flowers, he saw her. Persephone was reaching for a narcissus, her hand extended, her face turned toward the blossom. The sunlight caught in her hair, turned it to spun gold. She was laughing at something one of the nymphs had said. The sound of her laughter was like water over stones, like birdsong at dawn, like every beautiful sound Hades had not heard in 1,000 years of darkness. He stopped his chariot and stared. In all his long existence, in all the ages since the world began, he had never seen anything so beautiful, so alive. She was everything his kingdom was not. She was light and warmth and joy made flesh. And in that moment, the cold stone of his heart cracked open and something he had thought long dead stirred within him. He wanted her. He wanted her with a desperation that shocked him, a need so profound it was almost pain. But he knew, even as the desire seized him, that she would never come willingly. What maiden would choose the underworld over the sunlit fields? What creature of light would agree to dwell in shadow? Who would trade flowers for stone, laughter for silence, life for the company of the dead? Hades was not accustomed to asking. He was a king, a god, one of the great powers of the cosmos. So he did what gods have done since time began. He took what he wanted. He drove his chariot forward. The earth shook beneath the hooves of his immortal horses. Persephone looked up, her smile fading, her eyes widening. She saw him then, this dark figure racing toward her, his face grim, his eyes burning with something between hunger and desperation. She opened her mouth to scream, but before the sound could leave her lips, his arm closed around her waist and lifted her from the ground. The narcissus fell from her hand. The nymphs scattered, shrieking. Persephone struggled, beat her fists against his chest, cried out for her mother, for help, for anyone to save her. But Hades only tightened his grip and turned his chariot back toward the earth. The ground split open before them, a great chasm yawning wide, and darkness poured forth. The horses plunged into it without hesitation, carrying their master and his stolen bride down, down, down into the depths. Persephone's screams echoed through the air, growing fainter as the earth swallowed them. And then, with a sound like thunder, the earth closed again, sealing shut, leaving only torn flowers and the fading cries of the nymphs to mark what had happened. Persephone was gone. When Demeter learned that her daughter had vanished, her grief was terrible to behold. She searched everywhere, calling Persephone's name, tearing at her hair, her eyes wild with fear. She asked every god, every nymph, every mortal who might have seen something, but no one would tell her the truth. No one dared to speak the name of Hades or to point down toward the earth and say, "That is where your daughter has gone, into the land from which no living thing returns." Days became weeks, weeks became months, and still Demeter searched, and still she found nothing. Her grief turned to rage, and her rage turned upon the earth itself. She withdrew her blessings. The crops withered in the fields. The trees bore no fruit. The grass turned brown and died. A terrible famine spread across the world, and mortals began to starve, and still Demeter did not care, would not relent, not until her daughter was returned to her. Meanwhile, deep below, in the halls of the dead, Persephone stood before the throne of Hades and wept. She would not speak to him. She would not eat. She would not look at the dark palace he showed her, the treasures he laid at her feet, the throne he had prepared beside his own. She only wept, silent tears that fell like rain, and turned her face away whenever he approached. Hades did not know what to do. He had taken her, yes, but he had not meant to cause her such pain. He had thought, perhaps, that she would come to see the beauty in his realm, the strange majesty of the caverns of crystal and rivers of shadow. He had thought she might understand his loneliness, might take pity on him. He had imagined in some dark corner of his mind that she might even come to love him, but she only wept. Days in the underworld are not like days above. Time moves differently there, stretched thin, almost meaningless. But even in that timeless place, Persephone's grief did not fade. She sat in silence, pale as the shades that drifted through the halls, growing thinner, weaker, fading like a flower cut from its stem. And Hades watched her, and something in him began to break. He had been alone so long that he had forgotten how to love, forgotten how to see another's pain as more important than his own desire. But watching her fade, watching the light die in her eyes, he remembered. Or perhaps he learned for the first time. He understood, finally, what he had done. He had stolen life and tried to keep it in the land of death. He had taken joy and imprisoned it in shadow, and in doing so, he had destroyed the very thing he loved. But before he could act, before he could release her or beg her forgiveness, Zeus himself intervened. The king of the gods could no longer ignore the famine that ravaged the earth. Mortals were dying by the thousands, and their sacrifices had ceased, and the gods were growing hungry for the smoke of offerings, the prayers that sustained them. Zeus sent Hermes, the messenger, down into the underworld with a command. Hades must release Persephone. She must return to her mother. The world above was dying, and only her return could restore the balance. Hades received the message in silence. He sat upon his throne and stared at nothing for a long time. Then he rose and went to Persephone, who stood by the river Styx, looking into its dark waters, perhaps wondering if she could cross it, if she could escape. He spoke her name. She did not turn. But he spoke anyway, his voice low, rough with an emotion he could barely name. He told her she could go. He would not keep her against her will any longer. Hermes would guide her back to the world above, back to her mother, back to the sunlight and the flowers she loved. She was free. Persephone turned then, her eyes wide with disbelief, searching his face for the trick, the trap. But there was none. Only sorrow, deep and genuine, carved into the features of the god who had stolen her. She moved toward Hermes without a word, eager to leave, to return, to forget this nightmare, and feel the sun on her face again. But as she passed Hades, he held out his hand. In his palm lay 6 pomegranate seeds, red as blood, glistening with juice. He said nothing. But she paused, looking at the seeds and then at him. And for the first time since she had been taken, she truly saw him. Not as a monster, not as her captor, but as a being of profound loneliness, of ancient sorrow. She saw the emptiness of his realm, the weight of his isolation. She saw what she had meant to him, not as a possession, but as a light in the endless dark. And though she did not love him, though she still longed for her mother and the world above, something in her softened. Some small measure of understanding, of pity, of compassion for this dark god who had never known warmth. She took the seeds from his hand and ate them. 6 seeds. 6 small tastes of the underworld, the fruit of the dead, sweet and bitter on her tongue. It was enough. By the laws older than the gods themselves, anyone who ate the food of the underworld was bound to it, required to return. Hades knew this. Persephone perhaps did not. Or perhaps she did and chose it anyway, a compromise, a bargain made not in fear but in a strange, tentative compassion. When Persephone emerged into the light, Demeter's joy was beyond words. Mother and daughter embraced, and the earth responded instantly. Green shoots pushed through the dead soil. Flowers burst into bloom. The trees bore fruit once more. The famine ended as swiftly as it had begun, and life returned to the world in a great rushing wave of abundance. But the joy did not last. When Zeus learned that Persephone had eaten the pomegranate seeds, he decreed that the ancient law must be honored. She could not remain in the world above forever. For each seed she had eaten, she would spend a month in the underworld. 6 months of every year she would return to Hades, to the shadow realm, to the land of the dead. And so a new order was established, a rhythm that would govern the world from that day forward. When Persephone descended to the underworld, Demeter grieved and the earth grew cold and barren. The leaves fell from the trees. The flowers died. Winter came. But when Persephone returned, when she climbed back into the light, Demeter rejoiced and spring burst forth and the world bloomed again. The Greeks told this story to explain the seasons, the great wheel of death and rebirth that turns forever. But it is more than that. It is a story about loneliness and compassion, about the darkness we all carry and the light we seek. It is about learning to see the humanity, the divinity, in those who seem most foreign to us. It is about choices made not from love but from understanding, about compromises that honor both the darkness and the light. Hades never forced Persephone to love him, but in time, the myths say, she became a powerful queen in her own right, ruling the underworld not as a prisoner but as a sovereign. She was kind to the shades who came before her, offering them comfort in their passage. She was terrible to those who defied her, wielding her power with the authority of one who had known suffering and emerged strong. And Hades, who had taken her in desperation, learned to honor her, to respect her, to value not only her light but her strength. Their marriage was not born of romance. It was born of darkness and theft, of grief and compromise. But it became something more, something stranger and deeper than the simple stories of love we tell. It became a partnership of equals, two sovereigns sharing a throne, two halves of a necessary whole, life and death bound together, each requiring the other to exist. And the earth turned still according to their rhythm. Winter and spring, death and rebirth, the maiden descending and rising, the dark king waiting in shadow, the bargain honored forever. Thank you for joining me in this journey through the ancient world, through the stories that shaped how our ancestors understood the mysteries of existence. Next time, we will travel to a different shore, to a different myth, to another story of gods and mortals, of love and loss, of the strange and beautiful ways the divine touches the human world. Until then, rest well. Let the old stories settle into your mind like seeds in fertile soil. And remember that even in the darkest places, even in the deepest shadow, there is possibility. There is transformation. There is always, always the promise of spring. Good night.